Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I am here with Trenni Casey. We were just talking about her last name just a minute ago. Um, to, to just talk about sports, Trenni is an on-air reporter for NBC 10, and we'll be talking about her history and sports in the Boston area in just a minute. But before we get to that, I just want to say a couple things. One, I'd like to thank the Friends of the Ashland Public Library who support all of our programming. We couldn't do this fun stuff without them. I'd also like to thank Trenni, who agreed to let us share this program with other libraries. So in addition to our patrons in Ashland, I'd like to welcome patrons from Acton, Andover, Arlington, Cohasset, Goffstown, Hamilton, Wenham, Hanover, Manchester, Middlesex Community College, Medford, Needham, Newton, North Reading, Norwell, Norwood, Quincy, Spencer, Wareham, Wilmington, and Woburn. And as a not native speaker of Bostonian towns, I'm pretty sure I mispronounced a couple of them. But Trenni, you can let me know because you're probably better at that. But when libraries get to do things together, we make magic, and this I think is going to be magical. You can put questions in the Q&A. There's a button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and I'll be paying attention to the chat where you can just chat with each other if you think of something funny or whatever or interesting you want to talk about. But also, like I said, it's easier for me to manage questions from the Q&A. So Trenni is this amazing sportscaster from NBC 10, NECN. I would like to thank Susan Tran, who is here in the audience, for introducing me to her, because otherwise I'm not sure this could happen. Anyways, I'm not going to tell you about Trenni. I'm going to have her tell you about herself. So Trenni, welcome, first of all, how did you get into, what were you like as a kid? Were you like a sporty kid?
I was. I mean, I wasn't like, I was sporty, like I liked sports. I wasn't necessarily good at them. My younger sister, and my younger brother definitely got better sports genes. My sister for sure got better sports genes than I did, but I grew up in Wisconsin. So I moved here 11 years ago from Milwaukee. So I grew up in a suburb of Milwaukee. And when we were kids, my family was sports crazy. Like one of my first memories as a child is 1982. So I was about 5.5 because it was October. And my beloved Milwaukee Brewers were playing the St. Louis Cardinals in the World Series, and they lost. And my parents said I was like inconsolable. Like I was crying. I couldn't understand why. They were supposed to win the World Series. They were my favorite team. And the other thing I remember is because it's Milwaukee and the Brewers, unlike the Red Sox, never win anything. They had a parade for them, even though they didn't win the World Series. And I remember being like on my dad's shoulders and seeing like Robin Yount and Raleigh Fingers and Paul Molitor like go by in these like classic cars. I always tell people I grew up with like a Packers playbook and a bottle of beer in my hand growing up in Wisconsin. Like I always watched Packers games with my dad, Badgers games when I was a kid. And then as I got a little bit older, I'm not as much of a Badger fan anymore because I went to Marquette University. That's where I went to college. And so Marquette and Wisconsin are huge basketball rivals. And Wisconsin just thinks they're better than us at everything. And now we are better. So I am not a big Badger fan. I actually root against them. And I'm a big Marquette fan. As for my career, I'll just give you a quick background. I always wanted to be in TV from the time I was 8 years old. I used to like walk around and interview my family at holidays. And remember once I had like an easel and I did like a weather report on it. And when I was a junior in high school, we were asked to do a project about what we might want to study in college. Whatever we wanted to do after high school. And there were three things I thought about doing. I was going to be a speech pathologist, a special education teacher, or a television reporter. And the television reporter is what I always wanted to do. But I was also a really anxious kid. And I didn't really like being away from home. And I knew that it would be a hard career. Like I knew that if I wanted to really do it, I'd have to move away from my mom and dad. And that made me really anxious and uncomfortable. And my mom said, just go meet. We have this friend who works at Channel 12, which is the ABC affiliate. Just go meet with her and see if you like it. You know, we had to do job shadow. So I job shadowed all three professions as a junior in high school and fell in love with TV. So I immediately started interning. I did like a high school internship between my junior and senior year of high school. I did another college credit internship between my senior year and freshman year of college. And by the time I was a sophomore at Marquette, I was working in a television station as a weekend assignment editor, which means like you sit on this big desk, there's police scanners, you've got all the television stations on, and you just listen to all the news that's coming in, and you help assign reporters and crews to assignments and breaking news. You kind of figure out like what the day is, what you're going to send people out to cover and what you're not. So I learned kind of news judgment that way. And then during the week, I was a associate producer. So I wrote news stories, and this is the 90s. So it was back in the day where you would like rip scripts. They were like threefold, and you put them in like all these different piles of different colors. And I would go this is when it was okay to tell an intern. An anchor would be like, yeah, I'm hungry. Could you give me dinner? And I would go and I'd get dinner for everybody. But it was an unbelievable learning experience. I mean, I covered so many different things. And by the time I was a senior at Marquette, I mean, I was field producing elections. I was field producing which means I'm out in the at the site of the event that's happening, and I'm helping coordinate anchors and reporters on site, and then communicating with producers who are back in the studio. Sometimes I use lingo, and I realize that's only Susan Tran probably knows what I'm talking about. But I really wanted to be on air. And so I applied and applied and applied to, I'm dozens of jobs. I had a stack of rejection letters that were like this thick. And finally, I drove to Eau Claire, Wisconsin with my little VHS tape in hand. And I begged the news director at the ABC affiliate in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which is market like, I don't even know, maybe 140, 150. It paid $7.25 an hour. I was getting paid $11.50 an hour as an associate producer. So it was a big pay cut. And I begged him, I said, please I just need one job. I'll learn how to shoot. I will be a good editor. I will work really hard. And he said, are you sure you want to make $7.25 an hour? I said, yes. I said, I will do anything. I just want to be a sports reporter. And he said, well, I don't have a sports reporter job. He said, but I can have you sports report 2 days a week, and you can do news 3 days a week. And I said, great, I'll take it. And I took it, and I was there for 8 months. And then I got a job as a full-time sports reporter in Milwaukee, and then just moved on from there. And then from Milwaukee, I went to Pittsburgh. From Pittsburgh, I came back to Milwaukee for a little bit. And then from Milwaukee, I went to New York and worked at MLB Network. Then I came back to Milwaukee, I kept coming back to Milwaukee. And then finally in 2012, my agent called and said, hey, there's this job in Boston and they're interested in you. Would you want to audition? It was at the time called Comcast Sportsnet New England, tongue twister. And I said, yeah, you know what? And this, I'm sure we'll get into this, but this is the mindset of a female working in television. I thought, well, I'm 35. I'm not getting any younger. The job offers might not keep coming. So I might as well at least go meet with them in Boston. And so I went and I met with the people here, and it sounds so cheesy, but I knew I was going to get the job, and it felt like home. Like I remember driving in the car from my audition back to the hotel they had gotten me in the city. And I remember feeling like I was driving home. Like there was just something about Boston that stuck with me, and I loved it. And so that was June. I came back for a second audition in like August or early August, and then they hired me and brought me out here in September. So I moved to Boston September 5th, 2012, and I started on air September 10th, 2012, and I've been here ever since.
Wow. That is an amazing
It's
story.
a lot of moving around, a lot of moving trucks early in my career.
Your origin story is fascinating. But so I'm interested in the fact that your family was incredibly supportive of you wanting to go into television journalism or whatever you wanted to do.
Yeah, they were, my mom went to college but didn't graduate. She met my dad. They worked in factories during their summers. My dad never went to college. He grew up in a blue collar, south side of Milwaukee, Polish American family. And I was the first person on that side of the family to attend college. Now, since then, all of the cousins, except for one, have now gone on to university. But my mom, I think I think she would tell you, she always regrets not finishing college. And so with my sister and I in particular, she really wanted us to not, make the same choices that she did. She wanted us to go to college, to finish, and to do what we wanted to do. And I was always like, I'm a talker. Every report card I got was like, pleasure to have in class, talks too much. So I think they knew it was probably, I also was terrible at math, terrible at science, but very good at English and history and the art. Like those types of creative writing were more of my strengths. And so I think they knew it was a good fit for me. I will say it's hard though. My mom didn't, my parents were both, blue collar. I mean, we were middle class, strong middle, like the very middle class family. My parents couldn't pay for me to go to college. I had to put myself through college. And TV's hard. I mean, I made $7.25 an hour my first job. My second job in Milwaukee, which is like the 35th market in the country, I was making $28,000 a year. I had to bartend because I didn't have the kind of family money that, my family could say, oh, well, we'll pay your rent until you get on your feet, or we'll give you money, or you've got a trust that you can dip into. Like, there's no trusts in my family. There's not a whole lot of extra money floating around. My parents would help when they could. They'd pay for groceries or take me to dinner, and they were so supportive. But I mean, I had to work 2 jobs for the first 3 years of being on air and television. So when I was in Eau Claire, I substitute taught. On my off days, I would get a call and I'd go, be a substitute teacher at a high school or an elementary school or middle school. And then when I was in Milwaukee, I got a job bartending. And there was one point where I'm not joking, I was pouring a pitcher of beer. It was like very much a shot in a beer bar. And I had been up at Lambeau earlier in the day covering Packers and a Packers practice. And they had my station on the TV because I think there must have been another game on. And I popped up on the TV while I was pouring a beer. And the guy looks at me, he looks up and he goes, if you're up there, why are you here? Because I think people assume like, oh, you're in television, you must be so glamorous and make so much money. And that's, for some people, absolutely. For me at that time, no. Well, I had lots of roommates.
Well, you definitely, put in the hard work that is needed to get to where you are. It's amazing that it was just amazing that you stuck to it. So I wanted to talk before we get to the actual sports again about what it was like for you as a female going into sports casting because, when I was growing up, it was always guys, and there was always this maybe stigma or something about the locker room. I don't even know if journalists actually go into the locker rooms anymore.
Oh, we do, Mina, we do. And it's super awkward. I mean, it's very
I have
awkward.
to hear all about that. But yeah, for you coming through and wanting to be very focused on the sports, how was that for you?
So it was twofold, right? There was the positive side, which was, I mean, I just said this to Monica Medea, I was talking to yesterday, who works at NECN. And I said, I know that I got a job in Pittsburgh as I covered the Steelers. I was hired to be the Pirates and the Penguins reporter. Pirates, great. I'd covered baseball my whole life. I knew baseball in and out. I had never seen an NHL game in person. And I applied and I said, I don't know if I'll be ready right away, but I promise I will learn hockey. I will learn everything I possibly can about hockey. And they hired me. Like, I never thought in a million years they'd hire me. I thought they'd be like, why would we hire someone I literally had never seen an NHL game in person. And they hired me. And I know why they hired me. They hired me because I was like 115 pounds and I had blonde hair and I kind of looked like Melissa Stark back then. And she was the hottest thing. And they were like, and I think, honestly, I think my boss liked blondes. And so he hired me. And I worked with a producer at the time. It was very cold. She was a female. She was very Stephanie. She was very cold to me at first. And then in time, she warmed up to me. And she admitted, she said, I was so mad when they hired you because you weren't qualified. She said, but I learned that you were here to do a job and you dedicated yourself to it and you worked hard. And so now we're like still really close friends. But I'll never forget that. Like, I know that I got something just because of how I looked. And I know that that was a privilege and an advantage. And so as things have shifted now, and, people get frustrated sometimes with emphasis on DEI and emphasis on diversity. And I'm like, you benefited from no diversity. I benefited from diversity. They wanted someone like, I can't begrudge somebody else getting an opportunity now because we needed, it's like, it is what it is, right? I was not qualified for the job, but I got it anyway. And I say that most people who are in that position hopefully take advantage of it and grow how they are. So that's the positive side of it. Being a female, they wanted females, especially in the early 2000s. Everybody wanted one woman on their air. I just happened to be lucky enough to be that one woman. The negative side of it is that people assume And they weren't wrong. I got my job because I was a woman. But they assume that you don't know anything because you're a woman. And they assume that you have an ulterior motive. They assume that because you're a woman covering sports, you want to marry an athlete. So I would go into clubhouses and locker rooms. Like, I mean, I traveled on team planes when I was young. I was in the same hotels as these. I was around baseball players and hockey players for 250 or 60 days a year. I was on the road. And they will call your room. They will hand a baseball to you with their phone number on it. They will bump into you and drop their towel. They walk around naked in front of you. They say inappropriate things. And this was way before Me Too and way before you could speak up. So you just had to, I mean, I just sucked it up. Although I am a little mouthy. And so I probably sucked it up a little bit less. Like there was an instance where a baseball player called my name and I turned around and he dropped his towel. And I said, if you're going to make me turn around, at least make it worth my while. And that shut him up and he never did it again. But you had to be really careful. Like I had to be really careful where I was seen and who I was with. And that's hard because the only people you're around are athletes and broadcasters and they're all men. I had one female. She was a graphic designer. A graphics person. That was the only female I had on the traveling team. And at the office, Stephanie, the producer, was the only female I worked with. There was not another single female reporter. So about halfway through my time in Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh Tribune Review hired a female hockey writer. And I think my fourth year in Pittsburgh, I think MLB.com hired they hired a female baseball beat writer. But it was hard. It was a lot of alone time. And honestly, sometimes I would just say, screw it. And I would go out, like if a bunch of the guys were out at a bar, I'm like, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just I'm having a drink or something to eat after a game. And I didn't do anything that I wasn't supposed to do. I wasn't dating players. I wasn't sleeping around with guys. And I'm like, if you want to think that, you're going to think that regardless, whether I go home and, sit in my room immediately after a game or I go to a bar after. So I'm just going to go to a bar because I like to have a good time.
So that's really actually very curious to me also is that the players were the ones kind of trying to play with you as opposed to you going after them. Because there's that stereotype of if you want to get into sportscasting, you want to marry or hang out with sports players. But were they just janking you or did they actually want to like have relationships with you?
I think some were genuine, like some, wanted to maybe go out and see what happened. Maybe not go out. Maybe they just wanted to hook up. Although, and maybe this is too crass of a story to tell, but I'm going to tell it anyway. Very early on in my career, I was talking with a doctor. It was a team orthopedic. And I was just talking to him about what it's like to be an orthopedic. And he was like, how he would never let he's like, I would never let my daughter date a pro baseball player. And I was like, oh, interesting. Why? And he was like, and he was telling about like all the other doctors on the teams. And I said, well, what do those doctors treat? And he said, this is why I wouldn't let my daughter date a baseball player because they treat cold, flus, and VDs. And I was like, oh, that's really lovely. I'm allergic to penicillin. So we'll just skip that portion of the program. It's just, and listen, that too, I think is a stereotype. I met tons of guys that were not, cheating on their wives or, hooking up with every girl that came in, but there were some that were like that. I was told very early on when I started traveling with teams, you will go to hotels and in one city, we could have a 3-city tour. And in one city, you might meet a guy's wife. And in the next 2, you might meet his girlfriend. And you just don't say anything. You don't act surprised. You say, it's very nice to meet you, whatever your name is, whoever you are tied to, and you keep it to yourself. And that's their personal life. It didn't affect their play on the field. So I just nodded and said hello to whichever nice woman I met in the lobby.
Interesting. But do you think that I'm maybe digging into this a little bit too much, but do you think it's because they are in the same boat you are in terms of like being away from people all the time? I mean, they're like also alone and
I think that's part of it. I also think we worship athletes in this country, right? I remember being in high school and having, our football team was like decent. We went to state my senior year. But if a guy needed to get help in a class and he was a football player or a star basketball player, or wrestling was huge in Wisconsin, a big time wrestler, you would get exceptions made for you. The most popular kids in school were always athletes. It was always a football player or a basketball player or a soccer player. The cheerleaders and the pom-pom girls, which I was one, always hung out with the football players and the basketball players and the soccer guys. In college, that just goes up a notch, especially if you go to a Division I school. I went to Marquette. Like, it didn't matter how old a basketball player was. He could walk in anywhere to any bar at any point in his career, and they would just serve him, right? And people would fawn over them. And so I think at each level, I think that they have been the center of attention for so long and have been coveted for so long and desired that it just, you get addicted to the attention. And I think even if you have a really wonderful spouse who's beautiful and smart and funny, I think it's hard sometimes to turn that switch off of, that's also the same person when you get home is like, hey, you were gone for 10 days. I need you to fix that light bulb. I can't reach it. Where this girl on the road is just like, oh my God, you're so-and-so. I love you so much. They've been worshiped their whole lives. Especially if you're good enough to get to the majors, right? Or pro football, for whatever professional level you're at, you have been worshiped your entire, and not just by women, but by men and parents. I mean, think of how parents, and especially in college, like full-grown adults, we go bonkers for our college teams. And I think that's a weird headspace to be in. And I think it's hard to get out of sometimes, that sort of that privilege. I'm not making excuses for them, but I just think that I think it's instilled in top level athletes from a young age that they are superior to others. They have superior talents. They are made a big deal. And then we wonder why they act like they're better than everyone else. Well, they've been told since they were 8, some of them, that you're better than other people. And that's, I don't know how you break out of that mold.
Yeah. And if you think about maybe a 22-year-old making millions and millions of dollars and being at the height of their stupidity.
Yeah. How can you blame somebody? And honestly, I never listen, I always said, if you weren't married, I don't care what you do, male or female. And I am curious how, as women's sports becomes a bigger part of the landscape, I am curious to see how female athletes, are we going to be having the same conversation about female athletes? There are some female athletes who act just as entitled as men athletes. It's certainly not gender specific to male athletes. That's just what I've dealt with the most and had the experience with. But I've certainly met some female athletes who, they just think that the world should bow down to them because they're really good at something. And I just think that that's a product, again, regardless if you were a prodigy or just great at something. That you've been treated that way your whole life.
Yeah. You have to put yourself in those shoes and think, how would you behave given that circumstances? Although I hope I wouldn't, cat around. Who knows? So I have to make a book recommendation for you. Have you ever read the books by Susan Elizabeth Phillips? They're romances, but her main characters are football players.
Oh, really?
Yes. And they are hilarious and very much like what you just said about that entitlement and not seeing, what is around them because they're so sheltered in some ways too. They have their team and their teammates. So
everything is laid out for, I would love for you to submit it to expound on that point. Every athlete, especially at this college and pro level, everything is done for them. Yes. So you get a piece of paper that tells you everywhere you need to be every single day, including a road trip every time the bus is going to leave, when dinner is, when lunch is. That's why I'm convinced that's why a lot of them get married very young, because they need someone to help. They go from their parents and their coaches to their girlfriend and their coaches, and then their wife and their coach. It's like a stunted growth process.
Wow. Yeah. I hadn't really thought about that. And maybe that's why Tom Brady always looks so terrified about retiring.
Oh yeah. I also think it's hard. It's hard to walk away from something that you've done for your entire life, and it's defined who you are. Tom Brady will always be Tom Brady, the football player. So I think there's a fear of, and I empathize with him with this, because I think it even happens in our industry, where even if you're tired of being the grind of being on television and losing some sense of, if you're a politician, losing some sense of your own sort of personal life. And I know we were talking about this with Taylor Swift off before we started. You also get addicted to some of the perks that come with it. And you also are defined by that. So who are you if you're not on TV? Who are you if you're not a football player or a basketball player or a tennis star? If that's always who you've been, you know what? And I think that that's probably for any profession. I think retirement is really hard for anyone. People probably look forward to it, but for most of us, it happens at a natural point in life, like, your 60s or 70s. In some cases, your 80s, if you really love what you're doing. But I think it's hard to walk away and imagine a life where, I don't want to say you don't have a purpose after you retire, because of course you do, but like, we're such a work-driven society that purpose gets taken away from you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's
absolutely.
just magnified when you're in the public eye.
Right. And nobody expects like a 50-year-old, Gronk to have like a beer belly, right? Or maybe they do with him.
Yeah. But it's also weird. Like, think about it. Your career is over. You're 32. You're 32. Like, like, theoretically, you have 30 to 35 more years of working time. Like, it's like, what do you do? And for a lot of these guys, school wasn't probably the number one priority for them. Football was. It's why they're great. It's why they were able to be professional athletes. So what do you do if you don't get a TV contract?
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's like, what do you do if you're not going to be a coach? And let's say you do go to be a coach. So you've gone from making minimum, we'll just stick with the NFL, minimum wages for the NFL. I think it's between $250 and $370 a year for a practice squad player. An active roster guy, veteran minimum, I think is $1 million. And then you've got your top line guys like a Devin McCourty or a Tom Brady or an Aaron Rodgers. Like, those guys are making anywhere between $10 to $30 million a year. Brady got that kind of a contract from Fox Sports, but most guys don't get that afterwards. Mm-hmm. So you take a pay cut. Yeah. I mean, I know hopefully you've managed your money well enough that you can survive on the measly $1 million or $2 million a year that NBC is going to pay you to come talk about football 17 times a year. But it's still, it's hard. And there are a lot of guys who that doesn't happen for. Like, think about it. There are very minimal big time spots like that. So all of a sudden you're done and you've made $7 million in 7 years of your career, but now it's over. And $7 million, I know it sounds like a lot, but at the end of the day, it's not that much. And you've paid agent fees and taxes and dues into the NFLPA. And now you're 30 years old. You still have to work. Mm-hmm. And if you're a long snapper or a special teams guy, not named Matthew Slater, who, really made a name for himself, like, what are you going to do afterwards? Because that money you can't retire off that money unless you were brilliant and put it into some sort of stock and made a ton of money or invested in something. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot of guys, it's a dark time after you retire for most players. Not the top ones usually are okay, but those middle to lower tier guys, it's a massive, massive life change.
Mm-hmm. And would you say that that's across the board for all sports, or there are sports that are a little bit easier to walk away from?
I think it's hard to walk away from any sport, but baseball and basketball, the salaries are just so much higher because the rosters are smaller and your the amount of money that is invested. So you can be like, I have a friend, a guy who I covered named John Axford. He was a closer for the Milwaukee Brewers. That's how I first met him. And then kind of a journeyman. He probably made 25-30 million in his career. He hasn't worked now in a couple of years and he's fine. Like, he invested and he didn't overspend and he bought a house and sold it, like invested in some real estate. He hasn't pitched now in, I think, 2 years, and he's okay. Right. Like, he's got other things on the side. He's into music, he's into art, he's into photography, but I think he's an exception, not the rule. And it still has been hard for him. Like, I think he would tell you that it's hard for him to let baseball go because he has not found something else that he is as passionate about, that he's been able to dedicate his life to. And he's kind of searching for that right now.
Is it the sport itself, or is it the family that they create with their team?
That's a great question. I think it's a little bit of both, because you spend so much time with your teammates. And so you then become, it's kind of isolated, you quite frankly, if you're married with children, for a long time, you have not been the primary caretaker. And suddenly you might be thrust into that role. And maybe your wife, who put her career aside so that she could follow you from city to city to city, says, hey, I got a law degree, or I was a teacher. I'm going to go back and be a teacher. Or I was in finance. I'm going to do this now. You can stay home. You can pack the kids' lunches. And that's a real shift, a real dynamic shift inside the household. So I think it's really complicated. And again, I think it's hard for people to feel bad for millionaires, which most of them are in some way, shape, or form. But I don't think people fully understand the realities of like what goes on behind the scenes, and really where that, what the money you see on the piece of paper isn't necessarily what's coming back. And a lot of these guys, Ted Johnson talks very openly about this, former linebacker for the Patriots. He's on NBC Sports Boston with me a number of times a week. He fell into, after he retired, he went broke. He was addicted to drugs, so many concussions. He has, mental health issues. He's now sober. He talks about it. He's so open about it. But it was a really difficult transition for him. And again, he's one who I would say landed on his feet, right? He did radio in Houston, and now he does TV and radio in Boston. And he's got two amazing kids who are playing sports in college, and a wonderful girlfriend. He divorced from his wife that was with him when he played in the NFL. But it's been a hard road for him to get to that wonderful life.
Mm-hmm. Wow. We have a question about, and I actually had this as well. How did you learn to understand the NHL so quickly and be comfortable talking about it when you first had to learn? What was the learning curve there?
It was a steep learning curve. It didn't happen overnight. It took me, I was so bad at it at first. Like, it was embarrassing how bad I was. And I was trying so hard, and I was having I would have no cards, all this stuff, but I didn't understand, like, you can write stuff down, but if you don't understand how one thing connects to another, you just sound like an idiot. And so midway through, thank God, spring training started. They're like, we're just going to take you off hockey and we're going to put you on baseball, and we'll try this again next season. But in the off season of that year, of the NHL season, I subscribed to the Hockey News. I met with Eddie Olczyk, who was at the time an analyst for the Penguins, and then ended up becoming their head coach. And I would meet with him periodically, and we would watch parts of games. He would literally take salt and pepper shakers and move them around and show me where guys were supposed to be. I just read and consumed as much as I could, and met with people and just asked the dumb questions that I was afraid to ask. I just started asking, and I was like, I don't know what this is, so I need you to tell me. But I do remember, this is like one of my proudest moments. I remember coming back the second year, and one of the players who carried over from one year to the other said, we've noticed you did a really good job. You've really learned a lot about hockey. And I was like, oh, thank God. Because people who love hockey, right? It's kind of a niche sport. But it was hard. It was really, really difficult for me, because I didn't grow up watching it. Like, at least with basketball, football, baseball, like, even if I've stepped away from it for a while and haven't watched it, like, the basics are there. I might not know it inside and out like one of our insiders anymore, but I know enough about it that I can talk intelligently about things. But hockey has always been, it's a different sport. But it's so great, and it's so great in person.
Yeah, I haven't been to a game, but I watch it on occasion. I'm like, oh my gosh, that seems so violent.
It is, and that's one, it kind of, no pun intended, it skates when we talk about the concussion issues. Like, the NFL really gets hammered for the position it puts their players in, and the NHL deserves more negative attention on that front, because between the checking into the boards and the brutality of that, but also the fighting. If you have a chance, you guys are all readers. If you have a chance, there's a really great article in the New York Times about Chris Nyland, who's from South Boston, played for the Bruins for a bit, but kind of made his name as being an enforcer in the league, and won a Stanley Cup with Montreal in the 80s. And he has donated basically his body and his brain to the BU Concussion Center, because he got into hundreds upon hundreds of fights, starting when he was a kid on the main streets of South Boston. And they are now tracking his cognitive development and some of his like neurological patterns. Now that he's in his 60s, and they're going to continue to monitor him years forward, because they say even if he doesn't have neurological issues, that's something to learn from as well. Because why did he get into all these fights and take all these blows to the head and suffer all these concussions and constant repeated, brain joggling, for lack of a better medical term, and not have issues? Because thus far, he's actually pretty cognitively sound.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah, it's also interesting because I didn't know this. He was married to Whitey Bulger's daughter-in-law. So Whitey was at his wedding. There's this great anecdote in it about how on one side of the room, it's like his dad, who was like kind of a rough and tumble, like Southie guy, and like all these hockey players. And on the other side of the room, it was like Whitey Bulger and all his guys. Like that would have been a wedding that would have been fascinating to be at.
Yeah, I mean, were there guns involved? Who knows?
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
So let's get back to, well, first of all, Boston sports we're fanatics, just absolute fanatics. Are we more than other areas of the country?
Oh, yes. This is people here love sports. So if you're anything that's a part of sports here, you sort of by default, like become part of like the fabric of it. Like everybody knows who Mike Felger is. Mike Felger's never played sports before, but if you're a sports fan, you know who he is because he's like the foremost name and voice on Boston sports. I mean, I think he is. And so that, to me, that's interesting. Like you kind of know when your sports people become like little mini celebrities in town, that's how sports is. The only other places I've ever been where I feel like it's as passionate, like there are pockets, like there are huge Yankee fans in New York, right? Like people love the Yankees. There are huge Dodger fans in LA. But Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, I would say maybe those two are the only other places that I've been where it's as like insatiable for everything like to consume sports. Like there are 2 sports talk radio stations in this town and 2 sports regional networks here with Nesson and then us at NBC Sports Boston. And like if you ever look at the radio ratings, the Sports Hub is not just number 1 in sports talk shows in those time slots. They are the number 1 rated show in I think except for maybe middays. They're the number 1 rated show in every single time slot in Boston. Like people love sports and they consume it rapidly. And it's awesome. It makes it super fun to work here.
Oh, absolutely.
But also a very high bar.
Yes. So Katie wants to know if you have any predictions or suggestions for emerging pro sports teams in the Boston area.
Oh yeah, I'm looking at this like Boston Glory, which I'm going to be honest, I didn't even know. I don't understand. Ultimate Disc, Pride, Renegades, Free Jacks. Yeah, so that's a great question, Katie. I mean, it is hard, right? Because we have definitely on my show in particular, and then on NBC 10. So kind of what my daily duties are. I like skimmed over my past life, but didn't tell you about my current one. So I work for NBC Sports Boston and NBC 10. And so what I do is like my typical day, I tape some updates for Felger and Maz, which run during their simulcast on NBC Sports Boston. Then I immediately go to another room and I tape something for NBC 10 that airs from 2 to 3. So I tape a sports hit there. Then I prep for my show. And then at 5 o'clock, I tape, sorry, everybody, it's on tape, it's not live. I tape a sports hit for NBC 10, their 6 o'clock news. And then at 6:30, I host my own hour-long sports talk show. And so on those entities, like we've talked a lot about the Connecticut Sun this year. That is a team that has gotten a lot of publicity as of late because they're in the playoffs. They're a really good team. And, quite frankly, people understand basketball. They're also on TV all the time. We talk about women's tennis on our show. The other sports are a little harder, right? Like the Boston Renegades aren't on TV except for their championship game. Ultimate Disc isn't on. Boston Pride, are they still called the Boston Pride or is it something different? I think that's the hockey. I am curious to see now with a new women's professional hockey league and a new women's professional soccer league, how that also changes sort of the landscape and what we talk about here. I mean, the hardest thing is we don't consume a lot of the product, so it's hard to talk about it. That is the challenge, and that's on us to consume more of the product. And it's also on us. Like, I have to give our people credit. We lost the Connecticut Sun broadcast for a year or two, and we pushed hard and paid more to get it back on our air. So we've made a concerted effort to put high level women's sports on our air. But it's like, it's such a catch-22, because we don't talk about it, because we don't get to see it, and it's hard to consume, but yet we're not making a greater effort to consume it and watch it and broadcast it. It really starts, not to like pass the buck, but it really starts with people above us, above like an anchor or a reporter. It really starts with networks, and are they willing to make an investment in those other types of sports? And I will also say this, like, we really talk about hockey at our show. Like, the Bruins, like, we're the Celtics station, and everybody loves the Patriots, and the Red Sox are like a legacy team in town. So and our talent knows the most about football, baseball, basketball. So those three teams get a ton of airtime. The Bruins, I can't tell you the last time I talked to I mean, we probably talked about the Bruins on our air last, I think maybe like when they made Brad Marchand the captain. I wasn't even working that day, but I think they had like a tiny little segment, but we really don't do much with them because it's not our focal point. So it's kind of less about even the gender of the sport, and more about like the sports that everybody's interested in and consuming at the same time, which I know probably isn't the answer that you want.
But I think that, there's movement happening, and there's,
yes.
So we're starting to get a few questions.
Okay.
Somebody asks, do you prefer interviews or reporting the sports news?
Oh, that's a great, conducting the interviews.
Yeah.
So I do miss being in the field. Kind of like, what's it like being a woman in sports? There's like pluses and minuses to everything. I like being in studio because I am a creature of habit. And I'm very like regimented in my schedule. Like, it kind of keeps me on. So like, I have a very nice schedule. I get up in the morning, I go to the dog park with my husband and my dog, and then I go to the gym or I go for a run, and then I come home and I do my work, and then I shower and I go into the office and I work, and I come home and I eat dinner with my husband. If I'm reporting, like back in the day, I would be on the road all the time. I might not get home till 2 or 3 in the morning if like the baseball game goes into extra innings. Like, it totally throws like your whole life into flux. But I do miss, like, one of my favorite things to do, and something I've been really honored to be able to do 4 times now, is I'm usually a reporter for the Olympics. So I'm like borrowed, and big NBC borrows me. And for the Winter Olympics, I cover curling, and the Summer Olympics, and in the past, I've covered tennis. And so that gives me like my reporting fix. Like, I love being out there and interacting with players and talking to them and getting to know them. I think it's something I'm kind of good at. But I will say I like being in studio because it's just like a nicer lifestyle.
Well, you've put in your,
and it's fun to like have opinions and like jar with the guys a little bit, because it's pretty much all dudes on my show.
That's right. I do want to go back to, and we do have a bunch of questions that I want to get to, but I want to ask you about that locker room thing, because you were like, it's awkward. It's so weird from just the fact that people drop their towels and stuff like that. I mean,
less of that now, because now they get in trouble for that. So less of that now. Okay. Yeah.
But what is it about being in the locker room that fans want to see? Literally.
So like, I think the reason like the NFL Writers Association and the BBWA is like the writers union for baseball. The reason they push, I think, for locker room access is it's a lot different. And I hate the locker. I will be honest, the locker room's the worst. Like, guys are changing clothes. Like, they're going in and out of the shower, and they're trying to just get ready after a game, right? Or before a game in baseball. But if you get them at the podium, it's always more formal. It's less genuine. It's less authentic. Whereas if you get a guy at his locker after a game, whether it's a win or a loss, you tend to get the most authentic reaction to whatever happened. And it gives you a little bit more of an intimacy with them. Like, there are times, like, especially if having covered baseball for so many years, for like over a decade, if you go into a clubhouse pre-game, you can sit at somebody's locker and it's just the two of you. You can chat, and sometimes you can turn your recorder off and just talk to them. It gives you an opportunity and access to someone that is in a more intimate, personal setting. But at the same time, it's also, I always often felt like it'd be a little bit of an invasion of privacy. Like sometimes we'd all be crowded around somebody's locker and we shoving mics in people's faces. And then the guy next to him is like, man, I'm just trying to like put my underwear on. Can you guys like shift a little bit so I can get in and get my deodorant out of my locker? Oh. But you know, the unions, the writers unions in particular, really push for that access. And I understand why.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. Well, I hope that guy gets his underwear.
Yes.
So
we do too, because it's not a pleasant sight. It's not a pleasant sight.
Yeah.
Like a 350-pound lineman like bending over to grab is like that's not like getting anybody excited.
I hate to say this, but I think that some of the fans are like, ooh, what if there's a little slip there? Then you know, we'll catch that.
Yeah, no, you don't want to, no, you don't. I mean, maybe if it's like a super good looking, like really well cut guy, then it's like, hey, all right. But most of the guys in those locker rooms, like you don't want to see it. It's fine.
People are weird. You know that.
People are weird. Yes, yeah. People are weird.
So Paul says, thank you for your openness about your experience with depression and anxiety. What is something you wish everyone knew about mental health?
I wish everyone knew that they weren't alone, because I think the worst thing about having a deep depressive episode is feeling really isolated. Because, and listen, everyone is different, right? I mean, everybody experiences different symptoms. Everyone has a different reaction. Everyone is capable of different things when they have, you know, when they're in the throngs of anxiety, like an anxiety attack or a depressive stretch up. And an episode could last for me, there was a point where it lasted years. So for me personally, I just didn't have, like, you just are so sapped of energy. And like there were very few activities that felt enjoyable. And you just feel like you're a burden on everyone and no one wants to be around you because you're just kind of sad and you don't know why and you can't fix it and you can't get out of it. I always describe it to people, and I actually have kind of vivid memories of some of these times where I've gone through episodes where I'm out with friends and you're trying so hard to be engaged, but it's almost like your body has separated from itself and you're watching yourself from above and you're just sitting and like, oh, this is just the worst. I just want to be at home. And you don't want to tell people that because you don't want people to think like you don't want to be there with them, because that's not it. It's not about them. It's like you just feel terrible. And it's why I've just been really passionate about talking about mental health and talking about it in sometimes sort of graphic detail, about the things that I've experienced and what I've gone through, because I think the more we talk about it, the more people can relate to it. And hopefully that spurs people to know that they're not alone, that there is a way out, that it can take a while and it can be hard and it can be a lifelong battle and struggle. But, to see people that have come out on the other side and just know that they're just not by themselves. Because I think that feeling of being a burden on people is what often the driver to the most serious consequences of mental health, the suicidal ideations, the suicidal attempts, and unfortunately sometimes dying by suicide. It's just, you feel like you're not worth, like your mere presence is so heavy on other people that their lives would be better if you weren't around. And that's a real thing that people think and feel when they're in the throngs of depression. And I think we've come a long way on mental health. I think obviously athletes talk about it a lot more, but the one place I think we have a lot of growth is in the realm of where we talk about suicide, how we talk about it, the language we use to describe it, but also knowing that it's so many times people say, oh, that's so selfish. Why would they do that to someone? And trust me, as someone who had suicidal ideations at times in my life, I can assure you that no one who is in that place is thinking about themselves. They are thinking that they are doing the best thing for everyone around them. And so I would love to see us develop more compassion in that space.
Mm-hmm. I also think you said this very beautifully earlier, is that it doesn't matter how much money you have or how much notoriety you have or anything like that. You're still a human being who can have feelings of depression and anxiety and, suicidal ideation and all of that, because those don't, that's
not dictated by socioeconomics or anything. It's brain chemistry. Yeah. And I'd also like us to see us get to a point where we understand that that's what it is. Mm-hmm. I think there's also still an aversion to medication. And and not understanding that, you know what, I was on medicine for God, well over a decade. And then after I went through a pretty intensive form of therapy, I was able to come off of it, and I have not had to go back on. But it took 15 plus years for me to get to that point. But the medicine helps. The medicine helped me feel better. And the medicine helped regulate everything. Like, it's no different. I tell people this all the time. If you went to your doctor and he said, you're going to have a heart attack because your blood pressure is high, so I need to put you on this blood pressure medication, you'd be like, oh my gosh, of course I'll take blood pressure medication. I don't want to die of a heart attack. It's the same with depression or anxiety. Like, if it's going to adversely affect your life to the point of where it could cause death, like, to me, why would you not? Like, we should be encouraging people to take these medications, and then in turn also getting talk therapy help.
I'm going to ask this question because it's completely separate from everything else we've been talking about, but goes right back to the game. What do you think is next for the Red Sox post-Chaim Bloom? What can save the Sox?
Oh, what can save the Sox? Well, what would save the Sox is if the ownership would, to me, listen, Chaim Bloom made mistakes. He was not the right guy for the job in any way, shape, or form. He was not ready for it. He was not aggressive enough. I think he had an opportunity to make some moves at the trade deadline, but he was so afraid to pull the trigger. Like, stop talking to 16 different teams, just make the call.
Mm-hmm.
But he had that job because ownership wanted him to have that job. They wanted someone to come in from Tampa who was going to be cheap and find some diamond in the rough that they could pay hardly anything to, and hopefully, turn it into the Tampa Bay Rays of Boston. He was doing what he was told. He was trading away Xander Bogaerts because they didn't want to pay for him. He traded away Mookie Betts because they didn't think that he wanted to be here anymore, and they didn't want to pay what he was asking. Like, that's the edicts he was given. So, either you bring in somebody, I would love to see them, and not just because she's a woman. I've only heard her name mentioned once, but Kim Ng, who has been running the Miami Marlins. She's run, I would say Miami, even though it's a big city, I'd still put it in baseball terms of sort of a mid-market-ish team. But she has managed to make some big moves at the trade deadline. She's put that team in a position to be in a wild card race late in the season, a team that wasn't expected to do much of anything. She's built up farm systems. She worked for the Dodgers for a long time. Like, bring in somebody who has done something already and give them an opportunity to have a major job. And again, not just because it would be groundbreaking to have Kim run the Boston Red Sox, but because I think she's qualified for it. Other than that, I know they're interested in Sam Fold. I actually kind of like that move just for the simple fact that he's worked under Dave Dombrowski in Philadelphia. And maybe that's an indication that they're ready to be a little bit more aggressive and spend some money. But to me, it all comes back to ownership. And I'm real down on John Henry and that ownership group right now, because I just think they've got their hands in the NHL now with the Penguins, and they want to get into the NBA. And they've got Liverpool, and they've got, the Fenway Sports Group with LeBron James, and they're just trying to be like hip and cool. And they're spending all this money other places, but they're not investing in the team that put them on the map anymore. And you just can't do that with the Red Sox. Like, the Red Sox are a legacy franchise, and like, you could give away tickets in August and September of this year, and that is a travesty for that team. Like, I live in the city. You walk around and it's all Dodgers fans, all Jays fans, all like it's not Red Sox fans who are going to those games. It is people who go there because it's a museum and they're from out of town. They're like, ooh, I want to sing Sweet Caroline.
Mm-hmm.
And it's opposing fans, which is very sad.
That's amazing to me, given how much the Red Sox have done. But interestingly, I interviewed we had Chad Finn from the Boston Globe Sports. Yeah, he came to the library a few months ago, and he said exactly the same thing, almost verbatim, that it's the owners and the managers and things that have to look at this differently. Or
they got to invest again. When they were good, they invested money. And it's not my money. So of course I'm gonna be like, spend it. You've got billions of dollars. And I know that there's a reason billionaires are billionaires, because they're smart with money. But at some point you have to reinvest, and you've taken enough years where you've stepped back and you're below that luxury tax threshold. Like, it's time to spend again.
Yeah, absolutely. And because of the fans, the fans we're rabid, right?
Or they were, because the worst thing to me, it's like, if you spend a lot of money, you're like the Mets, you spend all this money and then you fail. Like, fans are ticked about it. They're mad that it didn't work, but at least they're mad. Red Sox fans are apathetic now. And if you're apathetic, that to me is like That's the worst thing you can be. When you stop caring about something, that's when you lose fans and they turn their attention somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we're in that, right?
Yes.
So, last question from the audience, because we're almost out of time. This has flown by. Scott says, looking into your crystal ball, what's next for you once sports journalist is passed?
Done. Oh, that's, I've actually been thinking about that again, going back to when I was 35. I was like, I better take this job. I'm 46 right now, and I'm in the last year of my deal. And I'm very hopeful. I keep saying I will sign every deal that they put in front of me until they push me out the door. But I have started to think more about what I might want to do, as I get like 50 or past. Like, even if they did make me an offer, would I want to stay, or would I maybe want to shift and do something, maybe working for a politician, maybe working for a nonprofit that's in the mental health sphere or the environmental, maybe one that combines both. Maybe doing something a little bit differently. Also because, when I was single, and I was single for a very long time, I didn't get married till I was 45. It was just me. So if I came home at 8 o'clock at night and ate by myself on my couch, it was fine. But, I have a husband who's an attorney, and while he works ridiculous hours sometimes, we're like ships passing in the night. He works 8 to 5, 8 to 6. I work 12 to 8. So by the time I get home, it's like I have to hurry up and eat. And then I have to, if I want to get up early in the morning, and then we spend a little time in the morning, it's just like this constant cycle. I don't get holidays off. I don't have to work weekends anymore, which is really lovely. But I don't get to work from home. Everybody else now gets, we would love to buy a place in Vermont. And I'm like, we can't buy a place in Vermont. When am I going to go? I can't, do my show from Vermont. Right. So there are some life things that I've started to think about more as I creep closer to the half century point. But for right now, Scott, I'm hopeful that that they keep letting me talk about sports on TV for a little bit longer.
Well, obviously you are so good at your job. And I do want to, Katie still asked, so I lied. I'm going to ask you one more question. What would be your advice for anybody wanting to get into sportscasting, but especially for women?
Stay true to yourself. I think it's really, really easy, whether it's sports broadcasting or anything that's like, again, sort of front facing and in the public eye. I think it's really easy to try to be what you think people want you to be, and to make yourself small. Maybe don't argue with someone because you're like, I don't want to argue with them. Are they going to yell at me? Are they going to think I'm stupid if I say something wrong? Like, say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing. Like, it's okay. You're allowed to make mistakes. You don't have to be perfect just because you're a female in any part of the world, sports or otherwise. I think too often we try to be a chameleon and blend in as women. And I would encourage people to stand out. I think, honestly, I think that's why later it took me a little while to sort of find that voice. But I think once I found it, I've had a lot more success. Not everybody likes it. I would have loved to have gotten an opportunity to go, work at ESPN and actually I have had some and they just haven't been very good, but go to big NBC, right? And live in New York and be the host of Sunday Night Football. But I'm a little mouthy. And I don't think that's for everybody. And that's okay, because I love what I do now. And I think everything in the end ends up working out the way it should.
Mm-hmm. I have to say that I think the whole mouthy thing really works for what you do. Like, you don't take crap from anybody, even those sports.
I've been mouthy since I was a little kid.
Yeah.
Since I was a little kid.
I love it. And I think you're exactly in the right place. And I appreciate the work that you do in all fronts.
Thanks.
So
thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your story and your honesty and for all of that. So thank you.
And send book recommendations my way. I am like obsessed with libraries. I love libraries. I love reading. Well, I got my first Kindle, which was like a big step for me because I love books. I love the way books smell, but they're hard to travel with.
They are, but
Kindle it is.
Yeah, definitely good books out there on anything that you'd be interested in, of course. And we're happy to make recommendations. We're librarians, right?
Yes.
All right. Well, have a wonderful day. We'll look forward to seeing you on the news. And thank you, everybody, for being here. This has really been fun.
Yes. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining. I appreciate it. Even though I couldn't see your smiling faces.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mina. It was so nice to see you, meet you. Bye.